Before we begin, I'd like to thank the many people who have made our program possible. First, of course, the Tanous family. Peter J. Tanous, who is a Georgetown College alumnus and a member of the Georgetown University Library Board, established the Tanous Family Endowed Lecture Fund in 2010 in honor of the Laureate Library's 40th anniversary and as part of the university's campaign for generations to come, which we're very proud to be a part of. We're extremely grateful to Peter and Ann Tanous for that gift and for their generous support. Their gift allows us to present this exciting program tonight. Peter and Ann, won't you stand so we can thank you properly for your generosity? I'd like to thank Vice Provost and Professor Adriana Kugler and Dean Edward Montgomery, both of the McCourt School of Public Policy, for helping us to persuade our speaker to come this evening. Library staffers, Amy Richards, David Hagan, Grace McKinney, Katie Thomas, and Zeynep Çelik. And the library's indefatigable Director of Development, Miriam Nickerson, who would love to speak to you after this program. And now, it's a grand privilege for me to introduce to you Professor George Akerlof, Nobel Laureate and University Professor in the McCourt School of Public Policy since 2014. Dr. Akerlof has, a resume far too much for me to mention, but he has taught and conducted research on economics with influences from other disciplines at the University of California at Berkeley, the London School of Economics. He was at the IMF, and in 2001, he shared the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, along with Michael Spence and Joseph Stiglitz. Dr. Akerlof has been recognized for his research that borrows from sociology, psychology, anthropology, and other fields to determine economic influences and outcomes. Dr. Akerlof and his Nobel laureate colleagues, I am reading a quote, led a revolution in our understanding of how markets behave when different participants have different information about the qualities of commodities being traded. His work has profound implications for the organization and regulation of important real markets such as the labor market, the market for health insurance, and markets for financial commodities. Prior to joining Georgetown, I already told you, he taught at the University of California at Berkeley. He was visiting scholar at the IMF from 2010 to 2014. He's been senior economist at the President's Council of Economic Advisors and past president and vice president and member of the executive committee of the American Economics Association, as well as a member of the Council Econometric Society. He's a trustee of Economists for Peace and Security and co-director of the Social Interactions, Identity, and Well-Being Program of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. Dr. Akerlof began teaching at Georgetown's McCourt School for Public Policy in 2014, and in 2015, he published his second book with Robert Schiller, Phishing for Fools, which serves as the topic of his remarks tonight. Please welcome Dr. George Akerlof.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for everybody for coming to this talk. So Bob Schiller and I, let me start with some prefatory notes. So Bob Schiller and I have written a book, and it's entitled Phishing for Fools, and here it is. This is Phishing for Fools. And actually, one of the best things about the book is the cover. The cover is done by this great cartoonist, McCourt, the person who does fuzzy animals. Now, I won't spend the whole time talking about why Corin did the cover, but he's become a friend of mine. The first and the most fundamental motivation for this book is to challenge the view of the public and of economists that whatever markets do is right. The further problem is that such belief that whatever markets do is right transposes our moral system. This is enshrined morality that greed is healthy, in the words of Ivan Boesky. Of course, all of this would take into account income distribution and such things as pollution. But that does not exhaust the reasons why competitive markets yield value outcomes. So the role of this book is therefore to undermine the fundamental basis of free-to-choose thinking by showing that there's not only a very good side to free markets, but there's also a very serious downside. So the book explores the notion that markets are also the playing field for deception and manipulation, because they spawn what we call phishing for fools. Now, all economists know this, but that leads to the second very general motivation. The rule of what can and cannot be published in economics leaves holes. There's some perfectly valid and important things to say, but there's no way to say them that would be acceptable in any journal. For example, quite a few economists thought that financial derivatives would lead to the current crisis. But economists could not figure out a way to express those views in the form of a paper. I believe that Phishing for Fools is one of those holes in economics because we all know it. It cannot be published, but then because it cannot be published in journal form, it gets ignored. And because it was ignored, we had the financial crisis, which is the central event in the economic history of our times. But then the book also has a subtext which gradually becomes increasingly important as it proceeds. That subtext concerns a principal way in which we think, and that results in our being fished for fools. So I'll come to that only at the very end of my talk, but I think it's very important. Okay. So with these prefatory notes, let me begin with the theory. The book is based on conversations with the psychologist Danny Kahneman some 25 years ago. So in a conversation then, Danny told me that the basis for psychology was that we humans are machines. We humans are machines that are prone to error. What is the job of the psychologist? The job of the psychologist is to ferret out that error. In contrast, he said, the basic notion of economics is equilibrium. That equilibrium means that if there is a profit, if there's a profit left on the table, someone will take up that opportunity for profit. We see that every time we go to the supermarket. So think about it next time you go to the supermarket. I always think I do. That people sequentially choose what they think is the shortest line. And then in equilibrium, the lines are almost the same length. So actually, until I wrote this, I always go and I look for the shortest line, and it takes me a surprisingly long time to figure out what's the shortest. But the reason is that's an economic equilibrium, because that's the way those things are chosen. So the question is how to put Danny's observation into economics. Okay, so Danny's insight says that free markets will not just provide what we really want. That's only the case if we human machines are making the right choices. But free markets will always also provide us with wrong choices. They will do so as long as there's a profit to be made. So to restate, the principle means that if we have some weakness or other in the equilibrium, that weakness will be taken up if there's a profit to be made. So what does that mean? That means that among business persons looking around and deciding where and how to spend their investment dollars, some of them, not only a handful, will look to see if there's an unusual profit from our weaknesses. If they see such an opportunity for profits, that will be what they choose. As a result, economies will have what we call a Phishing equilibrium. What is that? That's an equilibrium in which every chance for profit more than the ordinary is taken up, and that will include our willingness to make the wrong choices. So let me give you two examples. Okay? The first example is Cinnabon. And we know about those Cinnabons. They're typically at the type of place where we're waiting for some delayed flight. And you can find one at National Airport over there, and there's one at Dulles Airport over there. Okay, now I'm going to give you the second example with your capuchin monkeys. So this example comes from a metaphor invented by Bob Schiller. Okay. So I could have never thought of this, but Bob is a genius, and he thought about this. So Keith Chin, Venkat Lakshmi Narayan, and Laureate Santos taught Capuchin monkeys how to use money to trade. Okay? So the monkeys developed an appreciation of price, and they saved, and they did all kinds of other transactions. But let's go beyond those experiments. Let's do a thought experiment. Suppose we opened the monkeys up to trading with humans quite generally. We would give a large population of Capuchins substantial incomes and let them be customers of for-profit businesses run by humans without regulatory safeguard. Well, you can easily imagine that the free market system, with its taste for profits, would supply whatever the monkeys choose to buy. We could expect an economic equilibrium with concoctions appealing to strange Capuchin tastes. But amid the monkey cornucopia, their choices would be far different from what makes them happy. Why? We know from Chen and Lakshmi Narayanan and Santos that they love sweet fruit roll-up tacos with marshmallow fluff. So Capuchins have limited ability to resist temptations, and then we have every expectation that they would become anxious, malnourished, exhausted, addicted, quarrelsome, and sick. Those were to Bob. Okay, so we now have come to the point of all this. We shall see what it has to say about us humans. Our view of the monkeys has analyzed their behavior as if they have two types of what economists call tastes. The first type of taste are what the Capuchins would exercise, what they would exercise if they made the decisions that are good for them. The second type of taste, their fruit roll-up taste, are what they actually exercise. Well, humans are no doubt smarter than monkeys, but we can view our behavior in the same terms. We can imagine humans, like the Capuchins, as also having two different types of taste. The first type of taste, concept of taste, describes what's really good for us. But as in the case of the Capuchins, that's not always the basis for all of our decisions. The second concept of taste is the taste that determines how we really make our choices. And those choices may not, in fact, be always good for us. So the distinction between the two types of taste in the example of the Capuchins give us an image. They give us an image. We can think about our economy as if we all have monkeys on our shoulders when we go shopping or when we make economic decisions. And those monkeys on our shoulders are in the form of the weaknesses that have been exploited by marketers for ages. Because of those weaknesses, many of our choices differ from what we really want, or alternatively stated, they differ from what's good for us. So we're not generally aware of that monkey on our shoulder. So in the absence of some curves on markets, we reach an economic equilibrium, an economic equilibrium where the monkeys on the shoulders are substantially calling the shots. Okay. So that takes us to a further proposition. So this is a proposition that goes to the very, very basis of what economics is all about. The modern rendition of Adam Smith's invisible hand statement is that a competitive free market equilibrium is optimal. What does that mean? That means that once such an economy is in equilibrium, it's impossible to improve the economic welfare of everyone. For example, a change that would cause Ed's welfare to go up would cause my welfare or someone else's welfare, perhaps yours, to go down. Any interference will make someone worse off. The theory, of course, recognizes there's some factors that might blemish such an equilibrium, competitive free market. There are problems of pollution and bad distributions of income. We all know that. But with those qualifications, the result is true, believed to be true by economists. But then, with completely free markets, there's not only freedom to choose, there's also freedom to fish. So it will still be true that the equilibrium will be Pareto optimal. It still has these wonderful properties. But it will be an equilibrium that is optimal, not in terms of what we really want. It will be an equilibrium that is optimal, instead in terms of our monkey on our shoulder case. And that, for the monkeys, as for ourselves, will lead to manifold problems. Now, standard economics has ignored this obvious difference. It's ignored this obvious difference because economists have thought that, for the most part, people do know what they want. I must confess, as an economist, until I began working on this book, I really thought that these differences were really something that were really quite small, and that they really wouldn't make any difference. Well, that means that there is nothing much to be gained from examining the difference between what we really want and those monkeys on our shoulders are instead telling us. But think about it, just think about it. That ignores the whole field of psychology, because what's psychology about? It's about, for the most part, about the effects of those monkeys. It also ignores the fact that the competitive equilibrium will also involve people. It will also involve people generating information that will lead us astray insofar as is legal, and also insofar as there's a profit to be made by it. So we ignore, in other words, that markets enable fishing for fools. So the onus is now on us. As I said, as an economist up until 5 years ago, I would have probably thought that this was second-order stuff. Now, I'm not telling you that free markets are not good. That we start with. We say free markets are very good. I'm also saying that they're not only very good, there's also something else. There's another side to this. So the onus on Bob and myself in the book is then to indicate that in real life, this equilibrium does affect our lives. We have 4 areas of nobody could possibly want in which we're seriously fished for fools. So here's the 4 areas. Okay? So, personal financial insecurity. So here's area 1 of no one could possibly want. First is personal financial insecurity. A fundamental fact of economic life has never made it into the economics textbook. What is that fact? Most adults, even in rich countries, go to bed at night worried about how to pay the bills. Now, economists think that it's easy for people to spend according to budget, but in fact, we're going to later see in this talk that it isn't. So no one wants to go to bed at night worried about how to pay the bills, yet most people do. What's nobody could possibly wants number 2? That's financial and macroeconomic instability. Phishing for fools in financial markets is the leading cause. It's the leading cause of the financial crises that lead to the deepest recession. Every time it is different, the stories are different, the entrepreneurs are different, their offerings are different, but also every time it is the same. There are the fishermen and there are the fools. And when the built-up stock of undiscovered fishes, which is named the bezel by John Kenneth Galbraith, gets discovered, then asset prices crash. So in the last crisis, the investment managers who had purchased the overrated securities could not have possibly wanted them. So now we go to area 3, which is ill health. Here we discuss how the pharmaceuticals do their fishing and how the food industry, food with a PH, fills us with sugar, salt, and fat. Just to give you one example, in its 5-year career, Vioxx is estimated to have caused 26,000 to 56,000 cardiovascular deaths in the United States. So no one wants bad news. Furthermore, almost 69% of American adults are overweight, and more than half of these, 35%, are furthermore obese. Yet no one wants to be obese. And then there is tobacco. Okay. Area 4 then is bad government. Just as free markets work at least tolerably well under ideal conditions, so does democracy. But politics is vulnerable to the simplest fish, whereby politicians silently gather money for the interest and use that money to show that they are just one of the folks. That's what, unfortunately, people have to do. they have to do this to win elections. It's a terrible waste of people's time and energy. So that's another issue where you have to win an election, you have to get all those dollars to then go out, and then that money gets used, a lot of it for TV ads. You just have to do it. So, okay, so that's the beginning. Now I'm going to give you a taste of 2 chapters of the book. So probably most of you know Suze Orman, who is a popular U.S. TV. Now she gives, as you can see, she gives very loud and shrill financial advice. So her audience seems to adore her and love her every word. So when I asked an economist friend of mine about her, Gil had the traditional reaction. He had watched her for only 10 seconds. He couldn't stand her longer. And he could not stand her mom knows best voice. And he found her investment advice simplistic. But that does not explain the answer to a puzzle. You know, you watch that show. I don't know if how many of you ever watched it. But what is those audience doing? Why are they lapping her up and her advice? Well, her most popular book is The 9 Steps to Financial Freedom. Practical and spiritual steps so you can stop worrying. Okay, so think about that. Think about worry. Let's contrast what she tells us there with the portrait given of consumer spending in the economics textbooks. We're not going to find any worrying there. According to economics textbooks, this is how they go. We decide on our demand for the proverbial apples and oranges by having a budget for our spending, and then we choose the combination of apples and oranges that we can buy that will maximize our happiness. Okay? But Suze Orman's financial advice books tell us that consumers do not follow such a textbook protocol in their purchases. So how could consumers do anything other than what the textbooks describe? Well, I'm a professional economist, so I think I pretty much behave that way. But Orman tells us that that's not how people behave. She says that people have emotional hang-ups with regard to money and with regard to spending it. And they're not honest with themselves. And as a consequence, they do not engage in rational budgeting. Well, how could she know? She's a financial advisor, and she has a test. What's her test? She asked her advisees to add up their expenditures, and those expenditures all but invariably fall short of what a documented accounting from the records is going to later turn out. Figuratively, relative to that proverbial trip to the supermarket to buy those apples and oranges, it's as if her advisees spend too much time in the fruit section, and by the time they reach dairy products, there's nothing left over for eggs and milk. Now, I actually mention this because I know that this is the way things occur, actually at the end of the month in poor sections of town. That milk sales get a revival on the first of the month. So, in real life, such budgetary failure translates into having nothing left over for saving. So this failure to deal cognitively and emotionally with money, says Orman, leads to those unpaid bills. So it's her mission to keep those bills down so that her readers and her clients will no longer worry. They will no longer worry at night. So that's the role of mommy, and also why those audiences excuse that mommy knows best voice. So, I've already noted, more than parenthetically, that worries, as noted by Orman's subtitle, are central concerns in the financial advice books. That's what the financial advice books are all about, but you don't find them in economics textbooks. So we can paint a statistical story of what Orman talks about. Okay, so this poses a problem. This Suze Orman view of the world suggests that people are spending too much and they're worried as a result. So that leads to the question, why? So there's another perspective on this. So in the United States, As elsewhere, the goal of almost every business person is to get you to spend your money. That's the role of business. Life in a capitalist economy, then, is not only does it give us the good stuff, but it's also a continual temptation. So just think about it. So just walk down a city street. Okay, so go over to Wisconsin Avenue, over there. The shop windows there are literally there to make you come in and buy. That's what a shop window is all about. So there's some of us who are old enough to remember that in suburban neighborhoods, in the old days, there used to be pet stores. And those pet stores always used to have puppies in the window. There was even a popular song about it. So Patty Page, the singer, was coming down the street and she sees such a puppy in the window, and so she bursts into song. So here's her song. I hope you don't mind if I sing it. I don't have that. So, how much is that dog in the window? The one with the waggly tail? How much is that dog in the window? Arf, arf. I do hope that dog is for sale. Okay, so I'll bet you almost nobody in the audience knows what the subsequent verses say. Because the subsequent verses, you don't need to read Phishing for Fools. All you need to read are the subsequent verses. Because this is what she tells us. I must take a trip to California and leave my poor sweetheart alone. If he has a dog, he won't be lonesome, and the doggy will have a good home. So this is what she's going to do. She's going to go and she's going to buy the doggy. She's going to leave that doggy with her sweetheart. Then she's going to leave for California. So that's the theme of this book. It's what we want to capture in this book is this duality. So the wonderful thing is, she may have this wonderful love affair with this young man. And this may be the most wonderful thing. Every time the doggy wags its tail, he can think, oh, she's going to California, but she's such a wonderful woman. And we had such a wonderful love together. Okay, that's one possibility. Okay, but everybody else has thought about the other possibility. There's this scatterbrained young woman who's passing the pet shop. They've had the disastrous affair. She's leaving for California. It's all a mess. And she's leaving this doggy. And the poor guy is left with the doggy. And every time the doggy wags its tail or it needs to be walked or anything, he has to remember, not only does he have to take care of the doggy, which is a tremendous nuisance, he thinks back about how, oh God, what a mess. But you see, that's exactly what Pat Kaplan, adds the fishing to the threat, It's not that anyone was doing anything illegal or wrong. It's nice to have that doggy in the window. But at the same time, we have this duality. And so we have to think about the fact that, we have the duality. So, in the shopping mall, one does not literally walk down the street looking in the windows, but temptation is there asking you to buy. In the supermarket, the temptation is there on either side of the aisle. So actually, I've gone to our local Safeway to check to see whether this is in fact true. When you go into the checkout lane, I wish they didn't do this actually. When you go into the checkout lane, right there at this height, child's eye height, they have the candy. I wish they didn't do that. But the thing is, it's the competitive equilibrium. If the head of that local Safeway said she didn't want to do it, headquarters are saying, well, we have to watch the profit line. So, anyway, the idea then of temptation the consumer to buy, to spend her money, is at the heart of free market capitalism. And I've just given you a taste of that. Okay, so now I'm going to give you very, very brief, I think this is less than 5 minutes, I'm going to give you a snippet on the financial crisis. Now, there are hundreds of books on the financial crisis, and the typical one is 500 pages long. And the typical one tells the story of my institution. So it's Lehman or Goldman Sachs or Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or the Fed, the Treasury or Bank of America, blah, 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 blah. Okay. So implicit in each book is that my institution is the central feature of the crisis. The aim of this in 12 pages, roughly 500. So you scratch any economist and we go into economics. We're trained to think in terms of things like supply and demand. So that means that we often ask very good questions and have good analyses of problems. So Phishing for Fools, this is just simply an offshoot from how we standard economists typically do our analysis. But it's not so standard. It's not so standard that every economist was asking the right questions in the buildup of the crisis. But we should have been. Why should have we been? Because Phishing for Fools gives us an extremely succinct explanation for what happened and is the type of way that economists tend to think. So let me give you one rendition of that. So this is my rendition. If I have a reputation for selling perfect, beautiful avocados, I have an opportunity. I can sell you a rotten avocado at the price you would pay for the perfect right one. I will have mined my reputation, and I will have also fished you for a fool. Okay? So there are the avocados. Okay. So, such a story lies at the heart of the continuing financial crisis that dominates the economics of our times. The reputation mining in question involves the subversion of the system for rating fixed income security. So the reputations of the ratings agencies, Moody's and Standard & Poor's, had been built up over the course of almost a century. Their job was to rate bonds on their probability for default. Now, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, the ratings agencies took on themselves the task not just of rating bonds, but also of rating more complex derivative securities. The complexity of the payment structures made them somewhat hard to rate, but something else made rating all but impossible. The underlying assets, such as mortgages, were all but inaccessible to the raters. But the public would believe whatever ratings were given to them by the agencies. And so an industry grew up. An industry grew up to do a reputation bond. So by analogy, rotten avocados were being labeled perfect. With that label, they commanded premium prices, and so a whole Central Valley full of growers went into the profitable business of producing such avocados. So the mining of the ratings is the basic story of the financial crisis. Well, it's not the end of the story. The story is more complex. That's not all of the explanation. We must also explain why the production and sale of those overrated securities brought down the financial system. The answer, again, is simple. The value of these securities reflected their ratings. That enabled commercial banks and investment banks and hedge funds to borrow huge amounts of money short-term, invest in the overrated securities, and pocket small profits from the interest paid on every dollar of the investment. So they took on a lot of leverage. That borrowing was made with the rotten securities as collateral. For the moment, it seemed as good as gold. The ratings indicated almost no chance of default. But then the truth was discovered. Those avocados, perfect as they were on the outside, were really rotten on the inside. They were worth much less than the bankers and finance managers had paid for them. So, what do we see from Frankfurt to New York to Reykjavik? Financial institutions owed much more than they owned, and without bailout, they were bankrupt. So, the 4 questions, the chapter then gives the historical answer to 4 questions. So, this is embedded. How had the ratings agencies initially established their reputation? 1, what then changed, making it more profitable to mine that reputation than to keep it? Why were the buyers of those rotten securities so naive? And 4, why was the financial system so vulnerable to the discovery that the assets were rotten? So I've given you a taste of the book. There are later chapters on the role of advertising, on cars, houses, credit cards, on lobbying, on food and drugs, on invention, tobacco and alcohol, looting of the S&Ls. So there's a nice section on the financial system and why the financial system is as fragile as it is. And then there's a nice chapter on protections, because one of the things about protections is protections come from all of us. It's not just from government, it comes from people, and it also comes from businesses who provide protection, because businesses want to go after other businesses who are not providing, who are giving the bad product. And then there's a conclusion. Okay. So I've described the beginning of the book, but most importantly, what emerges is a new concept. It gives a picture, perhaps the major reason regarding why and how we get fish for foods. So that introduces a new variable into economics. So this is a book that, tells lots of practical stories, but it also tells us something that's very much missing in economics. The new variable in economics is the stories that people are telling themselves when they make their decisions. So this is a new variable that changes both how we think about economics and how we think about economic policy. So we saw that new variable, which is stories in rudimentary form in the Suze Orman example. Because Barbara and Tim, when they go to the supermarket, are telling themselves a very different story than what was rained down to them from 30,000 feet by economists from their textbooks. And that's why these consumers, at least half of the people in the United States, and probably more, are going to bed worried about food. So, but that storytelling is not just about why we worry about the bills. It's also about bad national policy and about our morals more generally. So in the concluding chapter, we tell how a wrong-minded U.S. national story, which says that everything will be pretty much all right if government steps out of the picture, and we just let people be free to choose, has resulted in systematic bad policy. So the book then is telling a story about the economy which contradicts the fundamental logic, the fundamental current logic of economics. It's also saying that the current national myth about what's good and what's bad is wrong. Puts in modern guise one of the most important lessons of the Bible. That lesson in the Bible is we should be our brothers and we should be our sister's keeper. This then is a book about Georgetown values. So, our society works partly, of course, because we have these free markets. We talk about this good side, but it also works because, and only because each and every one of us cares about every other. And so that actually is a very important bit of glue, which causes the markets to work well, and also that allows us to have government that also sometimes, pretty much, tends to work well and tends to take care of a lot of these problems of fishing for food. Okay, so thank you.